It's smokescreen season across the NFL with the NFL Combine going on in Indianapolis. Could that mean that the Seahawks are ready to move on from one of their biggest stars? We're going to be breaking down the latest report out of Indianapolis coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you are down in Tacoma, Washington, or you're listening from Grand Rapids, Michigan. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. A lot of buzz coming out of Indianapolis today, and it isn't just the Underwear Olympics day 2. Plenty of Seahawks-related buzz that we're going to be diving into. Plus, we're going to look at the big winners at the tight end, cornerback, and safety positions. There's one player in particular that might have put together the most impressive combine performance that I have ever seen. We're looking forward to breaking it all down here on our Blue Friday episode, which is brought your way by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It is most definitely speculation season across the NFL. A lot of buzz about a number of trades, extensions, restructures, and the Seahawks certainly are not omitted from that. And this was something that I had the pleasure of breaking this morning, reaching out with multiple sources. The Green Bay Packers, along with 2 other teams, have had discussions with John Schneider about the availability of DK Metcalf. And those that have been following the reports, Nick, I know you and I have talked about this as well. This was my big disclaimer at the beginning of all this. I do not think that the Seahawks are actively shopping DK Metcalf. That was not at all what I posted this morning. However, I do think that there are a couple teams that have at least opened John Schneider's ears to the possibility of maybe moving on from Metcalf. And look, this is what teams do this time of year with players who are heading into the final year of their contract, that they may have some potential concerns about whether they want to pay the price to extend them or if they're going to be able to reach an agreement. And the Seahawks certainly don't want to be in a position where this time next year, they're either having to use a super expensive franchise tag on DK Metcalf or they lose him for nothing. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise that there are a couple teams out there that have gotten beyond the cursory introduction stage. Normally, oh, hey, how you doing? No, he's not for sale. It has gotten past that point, particularly the Green Bay Packers, who have gone as far as structuring a deal that would include one of their young receivers that is available, along with a first or second round draft pick. And that certainly creates a lot of interest coming out of Indianapolis around a player that is potentially going to be on the outside looking in after next year. This should not come as a surprise with the price tag we're looking at for DK Metcalf potentially.
And look, I get it. Most Seahawks fans don't really want to talk about this because you trade DK Metcalf today and the roster's worse tomorrow. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I get it. I see trading DK Metcalf possibly as more of a reallocation of resources. Metcalf is kind of like a luxury that the Seahawks really can't afford and even don't deserve at this point with where they're at in their roster construction. He's like that really nice pair of pants you buy after you lose the weight. And for the Seahawks, that is losing the weight would be fixing the offensive line and figuring out perhaps your future at quarterback.
Yeah.
And so he's that piece you buy after you got the summer bod, maybe like his bod. I don't know. And so he's a nice luxury piece. Of course, he's one of the more talented receivers in the NFL. He's been really fun to watch in a Seahawks uniform. And for me, it's, again, a reallocation of resources because a $31 million cap hit, almost $32 million cap hit next year is monstrous. And I see that with a team like the Seahawks that has already another Pro Bowl receiver in Jackson Smith-Njigba, has major issues along the offensive line and, defensive line. They've got some holes to fill with free agency. and needing to re-sign Ernest Jones in the linebacker position, and looming extensions for young players like Reek Wallen and Bryant and Cross at some of the more premium positions with less depth than the Seahawks have at receiver, especially if they were to get one of those receivers in return in that trade. So I'm not going to be one of those guys that is just like, no, plug the ears, and like that Jim Carrey, I think it's liar. That would be unwise, I think, at this point, to not listen to some suggestions. I've seen like what you were saying with possibly getting a first-round pick from the Packers. Talk about getting 2 first-round picks. Then you can go get your quarterback and, draft and stash a guy like Jackson Dart. So you can use that first-round pick on a Jackson Dart and not having mortgaged your entire first round on a quarterback that probably won't start over Geno Smith next year. You can draft and stash him and then use another first-rounder on Membo or, Tyler Booker if he falls down there to 18, something like that. You can have that flexibility.
Or an edge rusher. I mean, this
edge rusher
is loaded with edge rusher.
Yeah, who knows? But I'm seeing this as more. I'm trying to be more practical about it than emotional. I get the emotional aspect of maybe possibly trading Metcalf, but a reallocation of resources into maybe really putting the Seahawks on the fast track to the future. I'm not sure that features DK Metcalf at a 30-something plus cap hit.
And I think if you were listening, and look, I was on site the first 2 days of the combine. I was supposed to be there the entire week, had to come home early, but I was on site when John Schneider was speaking with the media, and I understand that everybody's going to look at the response that he had on DK Metcalf. First off, the way that the question was worded, how do things stand with DK Metcalf? Well, how do you think John Schneider is going to answer that question? Of course, he's not going to come out and say, oh, hey, he's available. But he didn't definitively say DK Metcalf is going to be on the team next year. He didn't do that. And he didn't do that in a couple of the other interviews that he's had since then. And so I remember Pete Carroll's comments, we don't intend to move Russell Wilson. And then we saw what happened. And so, again, I'm not saying that this is a probable situation where this is probably going to happen. Right now, I would say 20 to 25%. I mean, that's higher than some people might think, but there is more than smoke here. And you can look at some of the conflicting reports that have come out since I reported this morning. Look, I'm defending everything that I said today. It has gone down. These two sides have had discussions that have gone beyond simply the is he available stage. And John Schneider's got to have open ears with these things, as you mentioned, because there are other needs in the team. And as good as DK Metcalf is, has he been good enough to pay $30 to $31 million per year for? That becomes a real question that the Seahawks have to answer, especially when it looks like Jackson Smith-Njigba is now their number one receiver. And that's what it looked like the second half of last season. And he's only 22 years old. He's going to keep getting better. If the Seahawks are going to go down this road, again, as I reported, Jaden Reed is not going to be available. And Christian Watson, he's coming off an injury, a significant injury. He wasn't going to be made available even if he was healthy. Those two are off limits. But Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks are the two young receivers that have been floated as possibilities. And if you look at these guys, Romeo Doubs is a player that I loved coming out of Nevada, but he's had some concussion issues. You can see those watching on YouTube, he's wearing one of those Guardian caps during games. And he also got suspended for a game last year because he wasn't happy with his targets and his playing time. And so that's going to be something that fans are going to say, whoa, wait a second. But Romeo Doubs has some ability to create downfield. He is a really solid receiver. I'm actually more intrigued by Dontavian Wicks if we're looking at this package, because Wicks has 2 years left in his rookie deal. Doubs just has 1. And even though Wicks had some issues with drops last year, he's a bigger receiver that can do some of the things that DK Metcalf has done for the Seahawks. He's not the same athlete, but he can create downfield. He did have 5 touchdowns and just 39 receptions last year. And again, you get 2 years of club control. The issue there is, and this is from the discussions I've had, Green Bay might be a lot more hesitant to give up a first-round pick if they're giving away a receiver that's got 2 years of club control than, say, one with 1. That's why these negotiations are so fluid, and I do think Metcalf would be asked to extend before a contract to be signed either, because Green Bay doesn't want to give up all this for a potential rental. So there are a lot of moving parts here, but this has really happened in terms of there at least being discussions beyond the introductory phase. And this time of year, we've seen John Schneider make moves coming out of the combine. Look, I don't know that I expect it to happen again. I think a 20-25% chance, but if it does, hey, the foundation has been set this week, and there are offers. There's compensation that is out there, Nick.
Yeah, and if the Seahawks are talking getting that first round pick with Wicks, maybe they sweeten the deal with a later pick back. We were discussing that personally between you and I earlier. Just what would that look like? And then every time a team wins a Super Bowl, I always try to go, okay, what can I learn from this? What can the Seahawks learn from the Super Bowl winning team? And we learned from the Eagles. You can win a Super Bowl with a superstar, well-paid receiver in A.J. Brown. Have you seen the Lions in Philadelphia? The Lions of Philadelphia, offensive and defensive, certainly were taken care of first. So I think this is a bit of the carriage ahead of the horse here, with wanting to pay for an elite receiver like A.J. Brown, like DK Metcalf, but without some of, like I said, it's a luxury item right now. I don't know if the Seahawks can afford, given the other resources they need to allocate towards. So it stinks as a fan, of course, because he's so fun to watch, but you really need to buckle down and get a dose of reality and at least explore this as a possibility and why it might benefit the Seahawks.
You also have to consider, Nick, that this would be the maximum time to get a return because he's still 27 years old. If you sign into another contract and then a couple years from now you decide, hey, we want to jettison this salary, and he's close to 30, good luck getting a first-round pick at that point. So this is kind of the sweet spot for a trade to happen. Again, if I had to hedge bets here, I would say that it's probably not going to, but this is a serious discussion. This is not just a playful phone tag type situation. And Schneider's past track record working for the Packers and that relationship, that cannot be discounted here either. We'll see what happens. The Seahawks may very well still be trying to figure out how they can extend him, but that price point and the fact that there are offers that at least have made it, John Schneider's got to open his ears up a little bit. That has made this a lot more interesting now, heading toward the start of free agency, the new league year next month. When we come back, we've got NFL Combine workouts to break down. We're going to be going to the secondary, checking out the biggest winners from cornerback and safety. Don't go away. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off and want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player like Steph Curry to maybe hit 5 threes or maybe 12 like the other night. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Nick Lee. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Day 2 of NFL Combine workouts now officially in the books. Quarterbacks, safeties, and tight ends putting on a show at Lucas Oil Stadium. And we actually were going to talk tight ends in the second segment, but look, when you have a historic performance that is put in by a player, and I'm going to just go out on a limb and say that this may be the most impressive workout that I have seen in the NFL Combine from start to finish for a player at any position, and that includes Jordan Davis a few years ago, cut out of Georgia. That was ungodly, but look, Nick Emanuwari from South Carolina. I have talked a lot about him on this show because I've been talking him up as a first-round pick because he's a really good football player. This is not just a testing warrior, Nick, but he's 6'3", 220 pounds. By the way, the Seahawks had a formal with him, so take that for what it's worth. But this guy is built very similarly to Cam Chancellor, maybe not quite as heavy, but he's built similarly. Different style player. He'll still come up and rock you. He's a hitter. But this guy had 2 pick sixes in his career. He's incredibly athletic. And no offense to Cam Chancellor, but he didn't do what this guy did today in Indianapolis. Nowhere close at 6'3", 220, a 4.38 40-yard dash, Nick. And it wasn't just that the guy was fast. he also jumped out of the building at that size.
Yeah, I mean, name a test. He nailed it. I mean, he hit it out of the park. The 43-inch vertical, 11.6 broad jump, also just ungodly, I think, is a great way to put it. And I just like the versatility. Last year, he took over 100 snaps at not just both safety spots, but it slid down to slot corner a little bit, can coverage. He's kind of your do everything defensive back. I think I saw in the live chat Kyle Hamilton. That might even be underselling it. We'll see. Just with some of this physical.
Kyle Hamilton didn't test like this.
Not like this. No, I mean, if he turns out to be Kyle Hamilton, the NFL player, great. But testing wise, this is pretty one of one company for Emanwari. So man, just this is where you get into like. Your mind can just go in so many different directions on what he could possibly do on the football field. And if you and I are doing this, Corbin, you can imagine what Mike McDonald, perhaps in his defensive mind, is perhaps. I mean, the likelihood of the Seahawks coming away with Emanwari, I think, is fairly low, but still, it doesn't hurt to lay in bed at night and think about stuff that makes you happy to kind of help you relax and go to sleep. I imagine Mike McDonald does things like that with defensive, weapons such as Emanwari, because this looks like a guy who, because we talk about offensive weapons, those guys the positionless kind of guys. Emanwari can be that on defense. He can look like maybe a defensive weapon like a Cooper DeJean in Philadelphia, who also didn't quite test like this. So again, this is kind of just I'm struggling to really put him in a box because I don't think there is one.
No, this is Cam Chancellor running like, look, I know he didn't run a 4.28 like Reek Woolen, but Reek Woolen is 40 pounds lighter than this dude. And he's running a 4.38. He's jumping 40 inches vertically, 11 foot, 6 inch broad jump. I mean, that's insane for a player of this size. And he didn't do the agility drills, but when you watch the tape, he's just as agile, he's as fast. I mean, this guy is a phenomenal athlete. Look, I think he's a top 10 player in this draft class. And I think he's one of the few guys that you can't clearly say is a first round talent. When you watch what he did at South Carolina, I would have thought going into the combine, maybe Seattle had a chance at 18. I'll be shocked if he's there at 18 with what he just did and on top of what he accomplished. This is not a workout warrior. This is a guy that is a really good football player. As far as other players to watch coming out of this combine that were big winners, I want to stay in the safety position because Mike McDonald likes playing 3 safety sets. And I understand corner depth is a concern, but I do think the Seahawks are paying close attention to what's going on at safety. Emanwari, as we mentioned, a formal. And Marcus Seigel from Kansas State is another player that had an absolutely fantastic day in Indianapolis. He doesn't have the size that Emanwari has. Nobody does at the safety position, but 4.37 40-yard dash, 38-inch vertical, 10-foot, 10-inch broad jump. Those are outstanding numbers. And this is a player that had 3 picks this year for Kansas State, took one of them back for a touchdown, 60-plus tackles each of his 2 years at Kansas State. He was a JUCO guy. This is a really good football player that'll come out and hit people. He's played both safety positions. And Kansas State is kind of like Iowa. They're 2 of the programs that, look, you don't remember them competing for national titles. They don't get a ton of 4- and 5-star recruits, but they just churn out NFL-ready players. And I think Marcus Seigel is another one that can fit that bill.
I'm staying in the Big 12. I'm staying in the Kansas States. If going down the corner, Jacob Parrish is a guy for me. He was top 3 testing with vertical jump and broad jump, and a 40-yard dash at 4.36 or 4.35. So I'm in the top 3 or 4 there for corners. So again, with Kansas State, you know what you're kind of getting: blue collar guys that work hard, and sometimes they turn out to be some of the best players in the NFL. I mean, ever heard of Tyler Lockett? He did okay for himself.
You're muted. You muted yourself.
I think something has gone wrong with my electric. Sorry. About this prospect, my computer shut off. So Parrish is a guy I'm going to keep my eye on for sure. And he a 66.2 passer rating allowed and 912 snaps in college for coverage, which is very, very impressive. Then I'm going to go to the one that I'm going to stay in the Big 12 again and go to Iowa State. And this is my favorite cornerback, I think, in the draft. Darian Porter out of Iowa State. Talk about a testing freak. My goodness. I mean, I think I read that the tweet from Per Math Bomb. This is his 33rd team on X. Per Math Bomb, Iowa State cornerback Darian Porter put up a relative athletic score of 9.99 out of 10 at the Combine. That ranks 4th out of 2,480 cornerbacks tested from 1987 to 2025. So he's 4th out of almost 2,500 corners testing. And then, again, not just a testing warrior, because we've seen those. That guys just test well. But with him, among 498 qualified cornerbacks at college, his passer rating allowed was lower than my sister's GPA in high school. My sister did a 4.8 GPA because, AP classes, all that stuff with California. I don't know, California education, whatever. His I'm getting so excited about it, I'm choking. His passer rating allowed is 4.7, not 40.7, 4.7 passer rating allowed. So
that's called being sticky right there.
Corner, 90th percentile size and length and speed, and you got that kind of coverage skills. Darian Porter, watch out for him. Excuse me.
Yeah, this guy is an outstanding press cover corner, and when you get that kind of athleticism to go with it, that is certainly one heck of a package. That's another program that we can lump in there with. I don't want to say about the Iowa schools. They don't get the 4 and 5-star recruits, but they turn these guys into standout NFL prospects year in, year out. And that's just quality coaching and having a great developmental program. The last player I want to talk about real quick, and we're looking at the corners and safeties, Caleb Ransaw from Tulane. And this player is somebody that I've been following kind of on the peripheral for a while now. And there's actually a funny story behind this, Nick. You may remember before College Football 25 came out this year that we had 10 years that there was not a new college football game. And we were recycling through the same NCAA football 14 game for years. And I always like to play as Troy. And Caleb Ransaw was an absolute stud of that game with the updated rosters a couple years ago. And I turned on the tape to actually watch this kid because Troy is a small school that has had some really good NFL players. And I turned on the tape and I'm like, this guy's actually legitimately good. Like, I really like the ability to play physical football. He doesn't have a ton of ball production, but he's a sound corner. He'll come up and stick people. He's kind of one of those pesky physical corners that really plays good press coverage. He's played a little bit in the slot too. And to see him go out and have the day that he did, again, looking at the numbers for Caleb Ransaw, 4.33 40-yard dash, 40-inch vertical, 10-foot 9-inch broad jump. I believe he had an 87 athleticism score from NFL.com's draft page. This guy is a really good football player. And Tulane was one of those teams that almost snuck into the college football playoff last year. And one of the reasons this kid coming over from Troy stepped right in and became the stud of that secondary for the Green Wave. I could see the Seahawks having a lot of interest in him, especially because their depth at that spot. They could use a corner. This guy can play both inside and out. I think he's probably a boundary corner for the most part of the next level. But they're going to lose Trey Brown most likely. Who knows what's going to happen with Josh Jobe and R.D. Burns. They need another young corner they can bring in. Caleb Ransaw is a guy that I think made himself a ton of money today, putting these athletic numbers up with the film that he has both at Troy and then stepping up his competition to Tulane this year. When we come back, we've got tight ends to talk about. And I'll admit, I was a little bit disappointed by the tight end workouts overall, but we did get to see some impressive performances nonetheless. We're going to look at the big winners at the tight end spot. That's coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Blue Friday show here on Locked On Seahawks. It's your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thank you as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And also make sure to make your second listen the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, you can get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, especially this week during the Combine. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Continuing to dive into the big winners coming out of Indianapolis, let's talk tight ends. And this is a position group that I think is one of the deepest in this draft class. We could have 2 or 3 tight ends go in the first round, which has been unheard of in recent years. Tyler Warren is considered by many to be the cream of the crop, but there's some other really darn good tight ends in this class. Some of these top guys did not test today. So that is one thing worth noting. But I will admit, Nick, I was expecting some monster numbers from a number of these tight ends. And I thought overall it was kind of a lukewarm day from this position group. Nonetheless, there were certainly a few guys that did have strong performances in the athletic testing in Indy.
Yeah, I thought about going maybe Mason Taylor, but he didn't test technically. So I know we look good in some drills. So I want to highlight two guys, one being Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon. With the Seahawks, I think Noah Fant could be a cap casualty. I like what we had, like what the Seahawks got from AJ Barner last year. I think that he's going to be a fine tight end for them for a while. So Terrence Ferguson, he tested the number one 40-yard dash time among tight ends that tested. Vertical jump at 39, also first, and 10-yard split at 155, also first. So as far as testing wise, Terrence Ferguson tests that about as well as anyone at the tight end position. With that being said, as far as size wise, a true tight end, getting your hands dirty, your nose dirty, and in the trenches, maybe not built that way. I think he could be a nice early day 3 pick flyer kind of guy. Again, I think the Seahawks can maybe or should maybe dip into this class with how deep it is, and really if they do part ways with Noah Fant and don't get him back on maybe a cheaper deal, AJ Barner is pretty much it. So on the depth chart, so maybe get another tight end. So I think Ferguson could be a good one. I do wonder about his build though. Another guy that's kind of from the same cloth, Joshua Simon, a tight end out of South Carolina. Pretty much was second along all those things. So Ferguson was first, Simon was second for most of those testing, 4.66 or 4.65 at 38 vertical, also second to Ferguson, 10.4 broad, also second. So as far as you're looking at the top two as far as the tight ends that tested today, and Ferguson and Simon, again, more of an athlete at tight end more than a pure blocking tight end. Slimmer build, poor blocking grades in college. But if you're looking for a crisp route runner who can catch the football smoothly and get out in space and do some damage and maybe find him in the late rounds, another guy like Simon could be of interest.
Yeah, Simon is one of those guys that in terms of running vertical routes and working down the seam, he has that top speed. He's got the boosters, the rocket boosters on his shoes. What he didn't do well in today, he did not test very well in the 3-cone and the short shuttle compared to some of the other players in this group. And so change of direction stuff, again, I don't know that is necessarily an end-all, be-all, but that was an area that he struggled with a little bit. For a guy who is known as a pass-catching tight end, that's something that you look at a little bit. Two guys that stood out to me, I want to start off with a player who we have not talked about to this point, and this speaks to the tight end class that we're talking about because there's a lot of really good players, but Jalen Conyers from Texas Tech. I saw this kid play in person a few years ago when I was down in Tempe. He played for Arizona State a few years ago, and he transferred this year to Texas Tech and didn't get to 400 receiving yards. He was in the 300s. He did score 5 touchdowns. He's 260 pounds. There's some blocking abilities, inconsistent out front, but you could see that he was a mover, that there was some athleticism to his game. I did not expect what we saw from him today, though. 4.74 40-yard dash at 260 pounds. And this is what impressed me most. We talked about the agility thing for Simon not being great. You can't say that for Jalen Conyers. 6.94 seconds in the 3-cone drill at 260 pounds. That is incredible change of direction skills for a player of that size. And he can play some fullback. He's played H-back. He can play as an inline tight end. He can play some in the slot if you'd like. There's positional versatility there. Conyers is a guy that isn't getting talked about a lot, but if you turn on the tape, another really solid tight end in this draft class, and he made himself some money. I don't know if he gets beyond, say, the 4th round. Maybe he's a 3rd-round selection in this class, but Conyers is a really good football player that also tested better than I expected today. And then another player I talked about yesterday, and I'll admit I'm calling him a winner, and there were still some ways I was a little bit disappointed, but Harold Fannin Jr., who's a tight end that moves like a running back. I love watching this guy play. He had a huge chunk of Bowling Green's receiving yards this year. I thought he was going to run in the low 4.6s. So a 4.7 140, not bad, but it was not what I was expecting. With that being said, reason that to me, he's one of the winners from this class. For one thing, there were a lot of guys that had really poor testing compared to what I thought they were going to do. But Fannin ran a 6.97 3-cone, not quite to Conyers level, which is what makes Conyers numbers even more impressive. But that is still a sub-7-second 3-cone from a 241-pound tight end is still really darn good. And you can see that with the way, again, he moves like a running back with tight end size. You could see that with the quickness on the field. He showcased today. He also had a pretty good short shuttle time as well. One of the few guys that did everything during the testing as he tries to climb draft boards. He is probably secured as a day 2 guy because of his production. He has been an outstanding pass catching tight end. He is a guy his size that I could see playing some fullback in the NFL and H-back as well. So some positional versatility. Inline blocking, that's not going to be his game. But if you're looking for a guy that can stretch the field, create after the catch, and break tackles, this kid, Harold Fannin, is one to watch. And overall, maybe not quite as good of a day testing as I thought he was going to have, but still the agility drills, what he was able to go out and accomplish, Nick, with Clint Kubiak saying they're bringing back the fullback. If Harold Fannin Jr. comes in as your move tight end and fullback, sign me up any day of the week.
Corbin really wants a fullback in town. And
I have for 10 years, Nick.
Nothing wrong with that, especially Kubiak seems to agree with you.
We are of the same mindset. We really are. We're old school. Like bring it back.
Yeah, you guys need to sit down and have dinner, I think. Jalen Conyers is a guy I've also looking at. And again, this is really the first year I've really started to start my own draft grade process just for fun, see how I might view certain prospects differently. Jalen Conyers, for me and my formula I've kind of put up, has tested really well in some of the stuff I'm looking at. In fact, I have him up there with like the Elijah Arroyo kind of a tier in some cases, day 2 tight end. So he's an intriguing one for sure. And Fannin, I think, is one of the darling tight ends of the draft class for sure. So again, I think the Seahawks do need to dip into this. Maybe not, a day 2 pick, but certainly a tight end with what's going on with Noah Fant. If they do make him a cap casualty, that just leaves AJ Barner. So I think the Seahawks probably, the 2 positions we talked about today besides safety, corner and tight end, I think are bigger needs for the Seahawks than some people realize. I think if you're looking down the road a bit more than just 2025, both tight end and corner, you need to keep an eye on this draft.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially the tight end spot. And look, even if Noah Fant returns, you're not going to have I would be stunned if Pharaoh Brown is back after the way that last season played out. This is still a team that needs to add, especially with the fact Clint Kubiak, not only does he like to play 2 back sets, he loves multiple tight end sets as well. They don't run a ton of 3 wide receiver sets. So he may very well say, hey, you know what? Hey, we did trade DK Metcalf, but I've got Jack Smith and Jigba. I'm going to add another receiver here, and I'm going to go get me a tight end that can catch the football. And that would fit with the way that his scheme has operated over the years. That's the Shanahan system for you in a nutshell. So this is a class I think you do need to take advantage of. And even though they didn't test as well across the board as I expected, the film is really good. This is an excellent tight end class. Again, there were some really good tight ends that did not test today and only maybe did on-field workouts, like, say, a Mason Taylor, who I think would have done really well in athletic testing. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back on Monday, there may be a bonus episode in between here, but when we come back on Monday, we're going to have our final thoughts coming out of the combine, and then it is full steam ahead to the start of free agency. Could have some roster moves to break down as well. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy the rest of the combine. Go Hawks.